platform is consisting of text that I will speak and read also, and I'm very happy that Maja and Kriegstein will very spontaneously influence me. So we do that together. The question for this is, how can artistic research contribute to exploring the context processes and relations that arise in creative situations of improvising with a notated reference or the interaction of improvising and notating? As both an improviser and composer, my artistic practice consists of different creative activities that I experience as quite entangled. The most important ones are the activities of listening, playing an instrument, and notating, but there are also activities like recording and working with the digital audio expression. I therefore understand composing and improvising as entangled conglomerates of such creative activities, and right now I research in my doctoral artistic research project how different combinations of such activities bring forth different creative processes. Through consciously entangling activities with each other, I reflect on the contact processes and relationships that arise between the participants of creative situations. My piece Pulsations, made in the framework of pianist Anti-Brussels and my composition project Inside Outside, shall serve as example for investigating these contact processes and relations in situations where improvising and notating or notation become entangled. I consider artistic research as very useful for my question, because as a practitioner, I'm in the situation that I research. I'm in transactional relation to it as one truly has formulated it. This can give and also complement other insights than the perspective that comes exclusively from looking on the situation. Schön explains how a practitioner constantly moves between the activities of reflection in action and reflection on action. And the basis for that is Michael Polanyi's concept of the tacit or implicit knowledge as the practical knowledge arising from the doing itself. He says, our own body is the ultimate instrument of all our external knowledge, whether intellectual or practical. In all our waking moments, we are relying on our awareness of contacts of our body with things outside for attending to these things. It is thus through our interaction with our surrounding that we experience ourselves and our consciousness is formed, as Noah has described it. Noah writes, by changing the shape of our activity, we can change our own shape, body and mind. Language, tools and collective practices make us what we are. So, by changing the shape of my activities in a creative situation, I can change the practice and my understanding. And they symbolize relationships in what we call free improvisation situation as right now, when there is no explicit referent present as a guidance. My body, or in German I would say life, interacts with the outside world's components, which right now consist material of a saxophone, the physical space, as well as other human bodies very few. To the outside world belong also immaterial aspects, everything that influences directly or indirectly the participants of the situation, such as the framework of the Symposium and what Kathleen Kersens calls the web of artistic practice, so my education, my practice, the community, and everything that was also mentioned before. My body interacts with these participants through the activities of listening and playing saxophone and relationships between us and the musical happening in others. There are three dimensions of these relationships that I find important. At first, there is the tactile dimension. As the nouns contact and touch etymology shows, all contact processes are based on movement and include mutual change through that movement. Contact processes through their original movement do not seem possible without the aspect of exploration and are thus by nature improvisatory, as Vincent Meerbeck has described it. He summarizes. Touch connects bodies, minds, and also sounds. It creates identities, musical and otherwise. And through touch, these identities are constantly formed, reformed, and communicated. Another dimension of the relationships in the creative situation is the concept of resonance, as Hartmut Rosa has described it, through four characteristics. There is again the moment of touch, of being affected, when something calls me and I feel addressed. Resonance develops if there is an own active answer, thus I experience self-efficacy, such as when I started composing the piece Pulsations. After having listened to Josh Sinton's 4 Freedom Suite, it did not seem enough to listen. I wanted to move and produce sound. I started playing the piano and felt again called when I had played the pitches of F sharp, G and D, and started sketching along in my notebook while singing and playing the piano. The third characteristic is the adaptive transformation, Anverwandlung it's called in German. I changed through listening to Josh's music and playing the pitches, and Josh's music and the pitches transformed also for me into something suddenly significant. The fourth characteristic is the uncontrollability, in German it's Unverfügbarkeit. We can never force resonance or prevent it fully, neither can we say in which way things become transformed. What we can do is to try to establish preconditions for resonant relationships. And with this comes the third dimension, and it is an extended understanding of the activity of listening that I concluded from the etymological relation between the German and Swedish terms for listening and obeying. In German it's zuhören und gehorchen, in Swedish it's lyssna and lyda, and it's inspired by formulations about musical behavior that Heinrich Jacobi has made. And And so I think that listening to the musical happening in the creative situation implies perceiving its laws, in quotation marks, and obeying to them, thus behaving according to them. In this way, the musical happening guides all contexts and relationships that develop. There is a new chart, not for this situation, but for the situation that I just described. So there is the notebook and a pen, and they are physical participants, but they bring also new immaterial aspects into the situation, for example, through the notation systems that I applied. And why did I notate, and what affordances did notating offer for the creative situation? One of the main reasons was obviously to remember improvised material, because it suddenly resonated with composing for Antje Rüssler and myself, and investigating notating's and improvising's relationship. The activity of notating was thus relating the improvising to a purpose outside of that situation and making it preparatory. Still, the aspects of answering to the inspiration of tactile and tactile acoustic satisfaction were relevant. Notating added one more tactile layer to the situation. Meerberg, drawing on Ferguson, reflects about pleasure-inducing touch and the differentiation in effect-causing touch and effect-presenting touch. The first one induces a pleasant feel, while the second one feels pleasant because of the touch sensory characteristics. So the entangled playing, singing, and notating was for me a mixture of both. The touch of the keys, or through the pen on the paper, the resonance of my voice in the room, induced as much joy as the prospect of improvising together with someone with these ideas later on, as I do it now. I enjoyed equally the new layer of reflection and translation that the writing added to the situation. Some kind of reflective, interpretative conversation established between the two activities. The notating became a partner for the improvising, at once commenting and also giving new impulses. Charles Seeger's terms of descriptive and prescriptive notation can also add another layer of understanding to that. With prescriptive notation as a blueprint of how a specific piece of music shall be made to sound, by descriptive writing is a report of how specific performance of it actually did sound. Since I was both giving blueprints and reporting, the notating underwent an ongoing movement between functioning descriptively and prescriptively. Also in a temporary sense, as pre-scribing. continued working with this physical trace that I described before, it inspired me to combine it with the concept of listening instructions that center around the pulsations, the beatings resulting from slight intonation difference on the piano strings. And the notation of pulsations, what we just played, became a combination of what I would call text box notation coming from contemporary Western classical music and lead sheet notation, the established standard for notating jazz and popular music forms of the 20th century. How did the creative situation change when improvising with pulsations in comparison to the ones before? Again, there is a new, at once material and immaterial body and partner. But in contrast to before, the trace of this creative process is now the starting point for the interaction between us. And for reflecting on this trace's affordances, I find Jean-Jacques Matthier's three-partition conception very useful. He introduces three dimensions of the symbolic phenomenon. The poetic dimension that refers to the process of creation, the aesthetic dimension that refers to the construction of meaning in an active perceptual process, and the trace, which he calls neutral level, which is the symbolic form that is embodied physically and materially in the form of a trace accessible to the five senses. And he shows this scheme, and so he says a notation always conveys something, but what is conveyed is completely dependent on the receiver's lived experience. Or Seeger put it in these words: culturally unconditioned listening to music is not known to us, besides certain exceptions. And considering the specific translation processes each physical trace is a product and starting point of, the creative situation would have become a different one if the trace of pulsations would have been a recording of spoken instructions and musical examples instead of the notation that you just saw. Notation makes certain of the aesthetic and poetic processes in creating explicit, which would have stayed hidden when only listening to a musical example, only in quotation. Despite that, as I just explained, or because of what I said before, the notation cannot convey the intentions of the writer, because the receiver has own aesthetic and poetic processes. Reflecting on improvising with pulsations trace in relation to my chosen forms of notation is also interesting, and it's too much for this framework, but I want to mention two last aspects. And I made this very simple chart of the piece's 5 parts. So there are text box instructions that frame the lead sheet parts and make the transitions between all parts. And this has also formal implications. As you see here, it's unfortunately very small. Like normally, a lead sheet would be the starting point for improvisation, and it would be, and all parameters could be improvised with. But now the lead sheet is, so to say, inserted in this other notation, which prevents improvising with the form. So it changes the course of the piece because it determines certain aspects for us when playing it. The first instruction to the pianist is listen to the fading away of the pitch and the pulsations that happen through the interplay of the strings. Listen also to the movement of the key and the pedal when you press it or release it. Repeat the pitch as often as you feel it is necessary. Decide whether the next pitch comes when you no longer can hear or feel the previous one, or if there are pauses, or if you even interrupt the fading of the previous pitch with the next one. This directs at first the musician's focus and sensual perceptions through instructing the tempo before turning to interactions with the instruments that shall be done. It directs the pianist's relationship to the musical happening and from there to the instruments, not referring to the evolving music but giving a framework for the musical experience. Later, the text instruction also shapes the relation between the musicians. The first instruction to the saxophonist is to listen to the interaction with the piano sound, the pulsations that happen through the interplay of the strings and between your sound. As soon as there is concrete musical material to work with, as you can see it here in part A, I use the notation form that demands to improvise a new development layer on the notated course. again only giving a precondition for the musical experience, but a different precondition. Much more could be said, but in sum, both notational activity and interaction with the notation transforms through its material and immaterial characteristics the participants' perception of the musical situation and also their behaviors. Through circular movement between reflecting through the practice and on the practice, I have established some kind of feedback circles, and I can perceive how my practice and my perception of the practice change. But since the contact processes continue to be ever-changing and improvisatory, in what way the resulting transformations of myself and the musical happenings will evolve and sound stays uncontrollable or neutral. Thank you very much to Maja, and thank you. Are there any questions or remarks or contradictions?
Thank you. There was one nice sentence you said, but it all went so fast, and it was something a simple idea that we all know, but it was a quote, something about culturally doesn't exist. Can you say that again?
I think it was that culturally unconditioned listening that does not exist, and I think Charles Seeger wrote it in 1958 in an article about, or it's a chapter about prescriptive and descriptive notation. I overestimated the size of the screen.
Yeah, thank you again. The term artistic research came up,
Yes.
and I saw it also in other contributions here, but I'm not familiar with that. So my question would be, could you explain it again in simpler words?
I tried, because I think the artistic research has very different concepts, and that's why there's so much being written about it. But I understand it as what I tried to say in the beginning, that you try to learn things from being in the situation that gives you other knowledge types than when you look on it. So for example, a lot of these things I've said now, I could also have said through just thinking about it, but I think, and I guess if I would have studied musicology, I would not have, certain details would not have been necessary, but some of these things I think I can only know because I do them, or we do them together. So also, like, this piece was written for another piano player, and Maja and I played today for the first time. And I learned something from the practice with Maja about the piece, about my own playing. And then the idea is I think there is one concept that says every art is artistic research. And then there's the other concept of, like, what I'm doing an artistic doctorate. So there are institutions that do this education cycle. And then the idea is that you inform and inspire the knowledge that you get from the practice with knowledge from other research disciplines, but on the subject, so that you, in ideal case, understand the things that you learn from the practice in other ways and can enrich it. And then in the very ideal case, I think that the artistic research, so to say, complements other research, so that there is like an exchange of knowledge. So an ideal case of what I'm doing here would also be useful for, and I also believe it will be useful for when you study, for example, if you know something about the relations in a creative situation, then you can say something about hierarchies in it, and that is also something that you can transfer, for example, to music schools or universities when you try to make environments for learning. Yeah.
I would have many questions about that, but...
No, I think it's an interesting discussion.
Yeah.
I guess artistic research, to me, it seems kind of maybe more of a Scandinavian kind of terminology. I mean, I now live and have lived and worked in the UK for a long time. We call it practice research, or practice as research, practice-based research. There's all this kinds of stuff. Of course, we could talk about terminology. I just an observation, but you explained it so beautifully, and I like how you use resonance as, social resonance, political resonance, cultural resonance. It's a really nice space to think through. And I think I was just slightly taken back by the first time I read obey, because you translated it, and I know there's a kind of a Greek etymology to it that also has to do with hearing. But of course, hören und zuhören in German is so much closer, right? It is about that listening, listening to, listening at, listening around. Whereas the sort of listening and obeying, it seems so jarring, so opposing. So I'm not sure if that's a particularly great term or translation. But then towards the end, I guess there's also a compositional component where, you know, the piano player somewhat obeys your instructions and you're obeying your own notation. So maybe it is a kind of a nice term. But yeah, I think from an English point of view, it's a bit like, oh, it has that flavor of servitude, right? To serve something, which I guess in a compositional term, maybe you are serving yourself in the situation. So.
Yeah, I think I'm happy about proposals for other terms, because when I first thought about this concept, I did it in Swedish and in German. But I actually think I like the implication of serving, I have to say, because I don't mean serving in the way of that you're like, yeah, or I actually mean it, because I don't serve like my instructions. I would say like all this comes together in this. In German, I can also express it better when you say musical happening. I actually meant musikalisches Geschehen, which sounds to me broader. But so I think I obey this in a way that I do what is best for this at the moment, and not that I obey because someone has put a hierarchy on me. But if I, so to say, play with Maja together, I want to do that what serves the purpose of playing at the moment best. So I think at one point you wanted to continue, and then I think I just stopped, and I think in another situation I would never have done it, but now I thought we have so little time, so I didn't, so there was like an obeying conflict.
I get the complete intricacies, but maybe serving is a good, because there's a gratitude to it. You can serve and obey in a gracious and in a kind way, which I think this is. So serving maybe is nice. Although someone else might say serving.
Felt like following.
Following is good.
I didn't feel obeying. I followed, like this street, there was a sign up.
Yeah.
Why don't you go there?
Yeah, I will think more about it, because actually I'd never thought much about the term. I just translated it somehow with my limited English, so it's good. I have to think more. Yes?
Yeah, I also wanted to ask a related question. You used the word, when you made the presentation, you used the word obeying the law, and then you make a quotation mark. So I was wondering, and now you use the word musikalisches Geschehen, musical as it happens. And I was wondering how you think about what this is, the laws and quotation marks, which are, how you think those things this in music.
Yeah, I think I put a lot of stuff in this very short presentation that I should have explained more, because there was this pedagogue, Heinrich Jacobi, I don't know if you're familiar with him, and I don't know so much about it, but I read the book of transcripts of his lectures, and he said something, es muss laut nach dem Gesetz, nachdem es angefangen hat, and I like that very much, because to me it doesn't mean there is an overarching law, but it means as soon as, for example, we start to play, the music evolves, and there are certain things, how the music functions, in my perception, of course. And so this is what I meant, or simplified with laws, because it means maybe that something is not appropriate in that moment, but maybe 2 minutes later it is. And so it's fluid. It doesn't mean I have a philosophy. I mean, of course, I have some philosophy on it, but it doesn't mean there is a pre-existing law. It means just you go into the situation, and then you listen to what is there, and then you try to react, and then all relations are, so to say, formed through that musical relation. Because also when I think about how I touch my instruments, I think you said it with the, I don't remember the word you used, but I think you also mentioned about how it is like that you have the instrument and the predictability. And of course I aim for that, and that's why I practice. But also I noticed that I find so many sounds when improvising, and do sounds that I never did before, or I do maybe because of the saxophone and the key combination, I maybe press something and just listen for what I can get from it. So there is also this dimension of searching that in the moment, but without listening, I would do completely other things. So the whole tactile relation to my instrument is also completely formed by the music, so to say. That's the law. Yeah, I guess we don't have so much time left. Is there
Okay.
one more question or otherwise?
Genau, ist perfekt. 12:10 Uhr. Wunderbar. 12 Uhr.